Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Ask Me Anything edition of the show. Who am I? I am Darryl W. Perry. And every Wednesday, I answer your questions. I will answer any question that is submitted to me. And to prove this, I have a very interesting question to begin the show this week. And it's sort of a lighthearted question. And I love the lighthearted questions that I get. And some of them are a little more lighthearted than others. This one definitely not educational at all, or at least not in, the traditional sense of educational. I definitely had to learn a little bit of something to try to answer this question. But some of the lighthearted questions that I get are somewhat educational. There was a question one time about where does snot come from, because the daughter of one of my listeners was sick and apparently had a lot of snot. Well, this week, and this actually comes from a new mover to New Hampshire, new mover for the Free State Project, and soon-to-be advertiser, and I will tell you all about this person. And they have a podcast, and I'll tell you all about that beginning sometime early next week. But the question is actually from the 9-year-old of the friend of mine. Says, my 9-year-old just asked me a great question, and we had a huge discussion on it. Would you rather fight one super-powered smart clone trooper or 100 terrible clone troopers? This is a perfect question for you since you're not a Star Wars guy. So when I first read this, I thought it was a variant on the whole question of, would you rather fight a rhinoceros-sized duck or 100 duck-sized rhinoceroses, or rhinoceros? I'm not sure what the plural of rhinoceros is, but I digress. So to answer this question, I first had to find out what a clone trooper is, and I'm somewhat familiar with Star Wars. Like, I'm familiar enough to where I know who Darth Vader is, and I know, Luke Skywalker, and I know what a stormtrooper is, but I had never heard clone trooper before. So I went to the Star Wars wiki, where, if you're going to find out anything about Star Wars, what better place to go than the Star Wars wiki? And, well, apparently clone troopers were an army of identical genetically modified clones created to serve the Grand Army of the Republic during the full-scale intergalactic conflict that came to be known as the Clone Wars. Grown at an accelerated rate and raised in the laboratories and facilities of Kamino, the clone troopers were trained throughout the first 10 years of their lives to become one of the most efficient military forces in galactic history. Bred for the sole purpose of combat, the clones were indoctrinated with unwavering obedience to the Galactic Republic, and more specifically, their commander-in-chief, the Supreme Chancellor. And then it goes on to talk about the Clone War. Apparently, for roughly 3 years, the clone troopers fought to defend the Republic against the separatist rebels, and blah, 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 something about the Jedis. And I'll post the link so that you can read about it if you're interested in it. But so the question is, would I rather fight one super-powered, smart clone trooper or 100 terrible clone troopers? And, well, this is where math comes into the equation. To quote Ron White, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ron White. Ron White's one of the comedians with the Blue Collar Comedy Tour, And, well, he tells a story about getting kicked out of a bar one time, and there were 6 guys, and he said, I don't know how many it was going to take to whoop my ass, but I knew how many they were going to use, and that's some handy piece of information. So I look at it that way, of I don't know how many of the 100 terrible clone troopers it would take to take me down, but I know how many they are going to use. Now, with the 1, I don't know if that 1 would be able to take me down or not, but I know how many they're going to use. And then superpowered, like that makes it sound almost like, sort of super strength and incredibly smart. So I think I would have to wind up, as much as the math is, against you on this, I think you are going to have to wind up going against the 100 terrible clone troopers, especially if they're like the Deltas or the Gammas from A Brave New World. So what I'm thinking here is, I would be, either an alpha or a beta in the Brave New World sense. And if you're not familiar with the Brave New World, there were the alphas and the betas were the one-offs. So they were not cloned, they were not genetically modified in any way. They were just regular people, if you will. And then there were the deltas and the gammas that were lesser. They were bred to be there's a whole bunch of identical twins. And there would be like 70 identical twins, and they would be, either deltas or gammas, and they were bred for specific purposes. So when I say either an alpha or a beta, I'm not talking about in the, pop culture sense of, I'm an alpha male, and if you're not an alpha male, you're a beta, you're a neckbeard, you're a basement dweller. I'm not saying, I don't mean beta in that sense. I mean, in the Brave New World sense of above the, weird clones, that there's like 18 of them that are all identical. So when I'm thinking of the terrible clones, I'm thinking of, like Delta Gamma sort of terrible clone, and I would be somewhere alpha beta. And then the one superpowered smart clone, he would be like, the double plus alpha. And yes, I realize I'm combining 1984 and Brave New World references here, but just stick with me. So if you've got, an alpha beta going up against a double plus alpha, then yeah, the double plus alpha is going to wind up taking you out. You've got an alpha beta going up against 100 gammas or 100 deltas. Yeah, the alpha beta could probably take out the 100 deltas or the 100 gammas. So even though the numbers are against you, that's my final answer. So B, 100 terrible clone troopers, final answer. Hopefully that was somewhat entertaining to people, especially the ones that have some kind of clue about what the hell Star Trek Wars is about. And now we're going to move on to something more serious, and it has to do with drunk driving. And, well, in some states, apparently, based on court precedent, you don't actually have to be driving to wind up getting cited for drunk driving. And I'll tell you about it in just a moment. Stay put.
When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
Hey, this is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends radio show. I've been working with computer programmer Derek Slopey to create Fiend Phone. I'm using Fiend Phone right now to talk with and record one of my co-hosts in real time. Take it, Davi.
Hey, this is Davi Barker, and I'm 1,000 miles away from Michael, but we sound like we're in the same room.
We sure do, Davi. So, Davi, please tell the nice people more about Fiend Phone.
PhonePhone is free, open-source software that opens up a global world of possibilities for collaborative, high-quality remote voice media production, and I'm digging it.
People can try the Windows beta version of PhonePhone right now at PhonePhone.com. But we're also raising money to vastly improve PhonePhone and vastly improve independent talk media worldwide.
So go to PhonePhone.com to help out. Who will build the audio roads? We will, with your help.
That's PhonePhone.com. FEENPHONE.com. Foxtrot, Echo, November, phone.com.
PhonePhone. I never knew remote audio could be this good.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
Before I continue the Ask Me Anything, I want to make sure that I tell you about Roberts and Roberts Brokerage. For nearly 40 years, Roberts & Roberts Brokerage has been a trusted source for buying and selling precious metals like gold and silver. They also take Bitcoin for precious metal purchases and have permanently removed the minimum purchase amount for all orders paid in the digital currency. Call Roberts & Roberts today for knowledgeable advice on buying and selling precious metals and a forward-thinking approach to new technologies. 800-874-9760. That's 800-874-9760. Or you can visit them online at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. So the next question, and it's actually the only other question that I have this week, but this is going to take me the rest of the show to give you all of the information about. The question is, what state has the most ridiculous laws allowing cops to arrest a drunk guy in a parked car? Well, the research that I've done, it seems as though the state DUI laws across the country, the way they're written, are basically the same. The differences come about in the penalties and in the interpretation of what it means to be the driver of the car. And I'll explain that a little more in depth. But let me first talk about some of the penalties, and I will actually tell you the best place to wind up getting a DUI. And yes, I realize that sounds incredibly strange, right? Like there's a good place to wind up getting a DUI. Well, apparently in New Jersey, and this from the NCSL, that's the National Conference of State Legislators. In New Jersey, driving under the influence is a violation, not a crime. So it's treated the same as a speeding ticket, basically. There are other states to where the first offense is a Class B misdemeanor, second offense is a Class A, subsequent offenses are felonies, so there are some states that are definitely worse than others. New York State, for instance, the first offense is actually a traffic infraction, which would basically be handled the same way as in New Jersey. Basically, it's a speeding ticket as far as, you know, the way it counts on your record. So there's no criminal charge there. In New York, though, a second offense and any subsequent offenses are misdemeanors. And that's actually driving while ability impaired. Driving while intoxicated is an automatic misdemeanor first offense. And there's slight differences between those. So the national standard for drunk driving is a blood alcohol level of 0.08%, but some states have other things of if you have over something but below that, you're impaired. And then there are also weird interpretations of open container in the vehicles. And I'll post some of this info or some of the links to some of this info in the show notes. There's some of the stuff like the open container that I'm talking about that I don't actually wind up having a link for. I researched it, and I forget where I saw the info, But some states, such as Alabama, nobody in the vehicle can have an open container. The driver would wind up getting penalized. Even if it's somebody sitting in, let's say you've got an SUV, somebody sitting in the third row of the SUV, that person in the third row has an open container, driver winds up getting cited for open alcohol in the vehicle. There are other states to where there can be an open container as long as it's out of reach of the driver. So there are different states that treat things differently in that regard. And let me give you some information here from the Governor's Highway Safety Association. They cite that 42 states plus the District of Columbia, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands have administrative license suspension on the first offense, meaning that there are 8 states that do not automatically suspend your license on a DUI. ALS, or administrative license suspension, allows law enforcement to confiscate a driver's license for a period of time if he fails a chemical test. Most of these states allow limited driving privileges, such as to and from work. All states have some form of ignition interlock laws, which allows a judge to require all or some convicted drunk drivers to install interlocks in their car to analyze their breath and disable the engine if any alcohol is detected. 20 states and 4 counties in California have made ignition interlocks mandatory or highly incentivized for all convicted drunk drivers, even first-time offenders. And then there are some states that they have special license plates for people convicted of drunk driving. And, so people are treated differently in different states. And I realize that I am not answering the question. The question was, what state has the most ridiculous laws allowing cops to arrest a drunk guy in a parked car? And again, as I said, there's not a state that specifically statutorily allows that to happen. However, it has, and people have been cited, and some of the circumstances that people have been cited for drunk driving in cases where they were not driving are absolutely ridiculous. But I found some of this info from the Find Law Blotter, which is the Find Law Crime and Criminals blog. And let me read some of the information that they have in a post called Drinking and Parking Can Be Illegal. Consider this. After a night of drinking, you head back to your car. You don't have cab money and no one will pick you up. At once you decide to do the reasonable thing and sleep it off in your car. Smart move. Or is it? Possibly not, though the law explicitly prohibits driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence. It actually prohibits a lot more. In some jurisdictions, you can be busted for parking while drunk. This is what many refer to as a parked car DUI, and its existence is contrary to common sense, which is why you need to learn the law and protect yourself. In some states and counties, driving is not limited to moving. It often includes operating a motor vehicle or having the ability to operate a motor vehicle. In other words, if you have physical control over the vehicle, you are driving. This is true even if you happen to be sleeping. Consider the following parked car DUI cases. In Brewer v. MVD, the Colorado Supreme Court confirmed a DUI citation given to an individual who was asleep behind the wheel with the car running. Car was running. There's 2 other cases that I will tell you about in which the car was not running, and then I'll give you more details on the Brewer case. Stay tuned.
Why do they hate us? Is libertarianism compatible with Islam? Davi Barker answers these questions and more in Voluntary Islam and Other Essays. He advances the voluntarist cause with analysis of the confluence of values between Islam and libertarianism, as well as contemporary movements from the Tea Party to the Arab Spring. Voluntary Islam by Davi Barker is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs, with a story like no other game before. A liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to zog.ninja to get your copy of Hyperchronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hyperchronius, zog.ninja, code FPP.
Are you tired of governments murdering people around the world? Stop using their money. There is an alternative. Bitcoin is a stateless, free market, non-political currency. Bitcoin cannot be inflated or controlled by any government. By using their money, you are helping the state. Stop doing it. You have an incredible alternative available now. Learn it, use it, spread it. Get started with Bitcoin at weusecoins.com. That's weusecoins.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio, online at fppradio.com.
So the question before us, what state has the most ridiculous laws allowing cops to arrest a drunk guy in a parked car? Well, that's not actually in the statute. What's in the statute is driving, and courts have construed driving to mean being in control of the vehicle. Sometimes it will specify that in the statute, but I've got information here from the Find Law blotter in which they're going over some of the more ridiculous cases in which people who were asleep were cited for what is essentially called a parked car DUI. The first one, Brewer v. MVD, that's the Motor Vehicle Department. The Colorado Supreme Court confirmed a DUI citation given to an individual who was asleep behind the wheel with the car running. So he's asleep in the car, car's running, and in park. Well, that seems, I can kind of see, and I'm not justifying this at all, but I can kind of see how the cop could say, well, you very easily could have put it in gear and driven away. It's running. The next case in State v. Lawrence, the Tennessee Supreme Court affirmed a DUI conviction when the defendant was found asleep in the front seat with the keys in his pocket. Keys in the pocket of the man who was asleep in the front seat of the vehicle. That was Tennessee, and I'll give you a little bit more info on that one. And then there was a case of State v. Peterson. The Montana Supreme Court allowed a conviction to stand for an individual who was found with his head near the passenger door and the engine running. State v. Taylor had a similar outcome, though the driver's keys were in his pocket. So we've got two cases here of people with keys in their pocket, asleep while intoxicated in their vehicle, convicted of DUI. Two other people asleep in the vehicle running, and also convicted of DUI. Now, the fine folks over at findlaw.com say, by now you should realize that the only real way to avoid a parked car DUI is to not get into a car while you're intoxicated without a designated driver. However, if you really have to sleep in your car, get as far away as possible from the front seat and do not turn on the engine. So let me now give you some information, a little bit more info on the case out of Colorado that was Brewer v. MVD. This comes from the law office of Jim Little, who writes, the offenses of driving under the influence and driving while ability impaired in Colorado include certain elements, each of which must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt in order for the defendant to be convicted of the particular offense. The first element is that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant drove a motor vehicle. Colorado statutes do not define the word drive. The word driver is, however, defined as every person, including a minor driver under the age of 21, who drives or is in actual physical control of a vehicle. The Colorado Supreme Court has used a number of decisions to apply the definition of driver to the undefined term drive to include actual physical control within the definition of drive. The Colorado Supreme Court first took the opportunity to apply the definition of driver in the 1986 case of Brewer v. Motor Vehicle Division. In the Brewer case, the issue was whether a motorist found asleep in a vehicle that was parked on a public street drove a vehicle. The court found that the state had met their burden of proving that Brewer was in actual physical control of the vehicle, and that the proof was then sufficient to show that Brewer drove a vehicle. In language and reasoning that can be difficult to follow, the court explained it is logical to conclude that a person who drove a vehicle was, at the time, a driver, and in so doing applied the definition of driver to drive. The court rejected Brewer's argument to the phrase drove a vehicle connotes driving in the commonly understood sense of placing and controlling a vehicle in motion. And there's more from this. Let me jump down here a little bit. In 2008, the Colorado Court of Appeals in People v. Van Matre, the issue before the court was the vehicle's operability. In that case, Van Matre was found drinking a beer while sitting in the driver's seat of a stalled vehicle that had no gas and a dead battery. The court held that a vehicle is operable if the vehicle was at least reasonably capable of being rendered operable. The court held that the dead battery was only a condition of a temporary inoperability and was stalled from running out of gas when the vehicle was only several hundred feet from a gas station. So even if you disconnect the battery, as I've heard some people suggest, they say, well, just disconnect the battery and then you can't crank it up. Well, apparently in Colorado, that would not be a valid defense, because all you would have to do is get out of the vehicle, hook the battery back up, and then you could operate the vehicle. So what then of the case in Tennessee? Well, the FandHDUIlawyers.com website, that's the law firm of Farnash and Hayduk. They have something on their website on the DUI FAQ. I was asleep in my car but still got charged with a DUI. How can this be when I was not driving? And they have a little bit of info here about Tennessee. Under Tennessee law, you can be charged with DUI for driving, operating, or being in physical control of a vehicle. Being asleep in a vehicle that is not running may constitute being in physical control of a vehicle. In determining whether the suspect was in actual physical control, the courts will look at the following factors: the location of the defendant in relation to the vehicle. In the case specified, State v. Lawrence, the guy was asleep in the front seat, keys in his pocket. Factor number 2 that they look at, the whereabouts of the ignition key. Number 3 is whether the motor was running. Number 4, the defendant's ability, but for his intoxication, to direct or rather to direct the use or non-use of the vehicle. And 5, the extent to which the vehicle itself is capable of being operated, moved, or operated or moved under its own power or otherwise. So, yeah, basically, long story short is, if you're in the vehicle, even if you have keys in your pocket and there's any kind of alcohol on your breath at all, you might wind up getting charged. We know for a fact that people have been charged of this in Colorado, Tennessee, and Montana. It's probably happened elsewhere, and we just haven't necessarily heard about it. I think I did hear something about somebody down in Florida, but none of those are cited in the info that I have here. So, long story short, don't get in your vehicle intoxicated, even if you plan on sleeping. But if you do, sleep in the back seat and make sure that the keys are away from you and away from the ignition. But again, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Long story short, if you get busted, call a lawyer.